Beneath an alien sky, our planet once wore a face that no human eye could recognize. The year was not measured as we know it. Days lasted only 22 hours, and the moon hovered closer, tugging at the tides like a restless overseer. The world itself was reshaped into something vast and strange. Pangaea, a single landmass stitched together from nearly every continent we know today. It was a continent so immense that standing upon its shores felt like staring at infinity. Deserts stretched like burning scars across its center, mountains loomed high enough to fracture the clouds, and forests clung only to the margins where survival was still possible. To the west roared a sea beyond imagination, Panthalassa. This ocean covered more than half the planet, swallowing 60% of the Earth's surface into an abyss of endless water. Twice the size of today's Pacific, it was not a mere body of water, it was an empire. Its vastness was terrifying in itself, an eternal horizon that dwarfed even the boldest of creatures. Yet in a cruel twist of fate, Panthalassa was not where fear lived, not anymore. For once in Earth's turbulent history, the oceans had fallen into an uneasy quiet. The great spiral-toothed sharks were gone. The armored sea scorpions had faded into shadows. Even the trilobites, once carpeting the seafloor in teeming multitudes, were reduced to whispers of their former selves. The seas, long the cradle of monsters, had surrendered their crown. It was the land that took it. Above the waves, on Pangaea's barren soil, predators thrived with merciless intensity. The aftermath of an earlier extinction had left a vacuum, and into that void stepped new killers, stranger and deadlier than anything that had come before. Life was no longer balanced. It was a contest of dominance, a brutal theater where every shadow could hide a hunter, and every clearing could echo with death. This was the late Permian, a time when Earth itself seemed to teeter between chaos and survival, a world where the seas offered peace while the land above became a nightmare. Imagine drifting across Panthalassa, the largest ocean Earth has ever known. The waves stretch endlessly, a mirror reflecting the sky, and yet there is a heaviness to the silence, as if the sea itself holds its breath. Once, these waters boiled with monsters. Sharks as long as buses carved paths through the deep. Sea scorpions armored like tanks ambushed anything unlucky enough to stray too close. Trilobites swarmed in numbers so vast they seemed eternal, but now, nothing. The titans were gone, swept away by catastrophe. The survivors were modest shadows of their ancestors. Sharks no longer grew to nightmarish proportions. Most were barely the length of a man, with teeth designed not for crushing armor, but for slicing soft prey, like squid. Ancient armored hunters lingered only as ghosts in stone. Even the ammonoids, relatives of squid and octopuses, floated through the waters in reduced numbers, fragile and small, a pale echo of their once thriving kin. At first glance, it might seem like a paradise, an ocean free from giants. But the silence was deceptive. It was not peace. It was the stillness that comes after disaster, the hush that hangs in the air after the storm has ripped through. The seas were no longer the realm of terror, but neither were they a sanctuary of life. They were wounded, fragile, waiting for something new to rise. And above this quiet abyss, the land burned. While Panthalassa lay subdued, its surface glinting with deceptive calm, Pangaea was alive with violence. Predators with saber-shaped fangs and eyes that gleamed with hunger prowled its plains. Amphibians the size of crocodiles lurked in swamps. Armored herbivores tunneled beneath the soil to escape. The oceans had given up their crown of fear, but Earth does not tolerate a vacuum for long. The sea had grown silent, the land had answered with monsters. And in that silence, an unspoken truth lingered. Safety was an illusion, and the worst horrors were yet to come. The silence of the oceans only amplified the chaos on land. Out of the ashes of extinction, predators emerged that would redefine terror. They were not dinosaurs, not yet mammals, but something caught between two worlds, the Gorgonopsids. To look upon them was to witness the earliest blueprint of a saber-toothed killer, a prototype forged millions of years before lions or tigers ever stalked the earth. Their skulls were stretched and narrow, their jaws hinged wide enough to drive daggers of bone deep into the flesh of anything they caught. Their legs did not sprawl like reptiles, but stood upright, carrying them with a predator's poise. And their eyes, forward-facing, sharp, unblinking, were the eyes of hunters that knew no fear. Among them rose a giant whose very name carries the weight of nightmare, Inostrancevia, stretching over 11 feet, weighing as much as a modern bear. It was the supreme executioner of the late Permian. When it moved, its muscular frame rippled with speed and power, a contradiction of bulk and agility. When it struck, its saber canines, longer than a man's hand, sank like knives into arteries and windpipes, ending lives in seconds. And Inostrancevia was no local terror. Fossil trails reveal a predator with astonishing range, roaming across what is now Russia, Asia, and even Africa. It thrived in deserts, stalked through plains, and prowled the sparse forests that clung to survival. It was adaptable, relentless, unstoppable. The land belonged to it, but Inostrancevia was not alone. Dozens of gorgonopsid species, from sleek smaller hunters to mid-sized killers, filled every niche of the food chain. Together, they created a landscape drenched in blood and fear. Wherever herbivores grazed, the saber shadows followed. Every migration was shadowed by death. Every watering hole was a trap. The seas had fallen quiet. On land, the saber-toothed killers had written a new law. Survival meant running faster, hiding deeper, or dying in silence. If the North gave us Inostrancevia, the South unleashed an even deadlier legacy, the rubigini. Imagine walking into a land where apex predators didn't come in ones or twos, but in entire lineages. South Africa was not the kingdom of a single beast. It was an empire of killers. These hunters were massive, rivaling Inostrancevia in size, but with skulls that told a darker story. Thickened bone, reinforced jaws, and serrated teeth designed not to crush but to slice. They weren't built for subtlety. They were built for carnage. A single bite could shear muscle, spill blood, and leave even the strongest prey staggering. Their skulls alone made up nearly a sixth of their bodies, grotesque monuments to the art of killing. One of the most infamous was Rubigia atrox, a predator whose very silhouette spoke of dominance. Over 3 meters long, its cranium was not only enormous, but grotesquely heavy, scarred with ridges and bony protrusions that hinted at violent struggles. Its bite was not the strongest among predators, barely stronger than a wolf's, but its saw-bladed teeth made raw strength unnecessary. Flesh yielded easily, arteries tore cleanly. Rubigia's bite was less about crushing, more about carving. And Rubigia did not rule alone. The Rubiginiates were a family, a dynasty of hunters. 9 genera spread across southern landscapes, each one monstrous in its own right. Some were slightly smaller, some equally massive, but together they formed a lethal guild. Imagine an ecosystem where not one, but several apex predators hunted simultaneously, competing, clashing, and carving their territories with blood. Fossils suggest an even more chilling possibility, that the northern titan Inostrancevia may have wandered south, bringing its saber fangs into direct competition with Rubigia's serrated arsenal. If so, the plains of the Permian South may once have echoed with battles between giants, saber-toothed killers meeting skull crushers in duels that shook the earth. South Africa was no sanctuary. It was a war zone, where dominance was measured in scars and survival was written in bones. And within that battlefield, every herbivore that dared to live had only one choice: evolve or vanish. As if saber-toothed killers and skull crushers were not enough, the late Permian brimmed with predators of every shape and design. The land was not ruled by one nightmare, but by many, each with its own cruel method of survival. Enter the Therocephalians, the beast-headed hunters. They looked like twisted cousins of the gorgonopsids, shorter bodies, broader skulls, teeth less dramatic but no less effective. Some were small and nimble, darting after insects and reptiles. Others grew to the size of jaguars, their jaws lined with sharp conical fangs capable of puncturing through hide and sinew. A few, astonishingly, may have carried venom. Tiny grooves in fossilized skulls suggest channels for poison, making them among the first land vertebrates to experiment with toxic weaponry. Imagine the terror, a predator whose bite not only pierced flesh but poisoned it. One name looms above the rest: Mascarinus, a heavyweight of the Therocephalians. With a body rivaling a big cat and a skull oversized for its frame, it was a brute force predator. Its muscular forelimbs pinned prey to the ground, while its dagger teeth delivered fatal bites. Unlike many hunters that roamed in smaller numbers, Mascarinus flourished, spreading widely and often taking the role of top predator when gorgonopsids were absent. And yet Mascarinus was not the largest. That honor belonged to Megawatzia, a Russian terror nearly 3 meters long. This beast may have employed venom, striking and waiting as its prey collapsed from shock and blood loss. Whether venomous or not, it was a predator so fearsome that its very name echoes with dread. But the chaos did not end with therapsids. Ancient amphibians lurked in rivers and swamps, ambushing anything that approached the water's edge. Uranocentrodon, 4 meters of muscle and teeth, could erupt from the shallows like a living trap. Melosaurus, slimmer but equally deadly, prowled European rivers as a stealth hunter. On land, Croniosuchians, armored tetrapods, plated like medieval warriors, crept along the banks. And rising in the shadows were the archosauriforms, crocodile-like hunters, thin, fast, needle-toothed, the ancestors of an empire yet to come. This was not a world of balance. It was a carnival of violence, a stage overflowing with killers, each one evolved to tear, poison, crush, or ambush. And in the midst of this storm of predators, the herbivores still fought to endure. Then came the day when Earth itself rose up against all life. In Siberia, the ground split open in fury. Volcanoes did not simply erupt. They bled fire for thousands of years. Rivers of lava a kilometer thick swallowed forests, plains, and mountains whole. The air filled with choking gases. Carbon dioxide wrapped the planet in a furnace, while sulfur turned rains to acid. The ozone above fractured, and sunlight became a weapon, searing the land with radiation. Temperatures soared beyond endurance. Across Pangaea, deserts grew, rivers vanished, and forests crumbled into ash. The oceans fared no better. Waters heated, oxygen bled away, and life suffocated. Coral reefs dissolved. Entire food chains collapsed. The last trilobites, survivors of hundreds of millions of years, vanished forever. On land, predators that had once ruled, unchallenged, fell in waves. The saber-toothed gorgonopsids, the skull-crushing rubiginae, the venomous Mascarinus, each line snuffed out as prey, dwindled and heat suffocated their world. Armored herbivores, once fortresses of flesh and bone, toppled into extinction. Amphibians, archosauriforms, insect empires, all crumbled before the wrath of the planet. This was not just another extinction, it was the Great Dying. In the span of a geological heartbeat, 83% of all species were erased. More than half of all biological families disappeared. Earth had never seen destruction on this scale, and it has never seen it again. Compared to this, the asteroid that would one day doom the dinosaurs was but a fleeting spark. And yet, even here in fire and poison, life refused to surrender. Small, stubborn survivors clung to existence. Burrowers, scavengers, and resilient plants carried the torch through the darkness. From those ashes would rise the next chapter, the age of dinosaurs, and beyond that the eventual dawn of humankind. But the late Permian left its scar. It taught that no predator is too strong, no dynasty too secure. The planet itself can erase kingdoms in a single breath. For millions of years, the Earth had been a world of monsters, and in one apocalyptic moment it became their grave.